Well, thank you everyone for joining us for another Q&A session at ICMI 21. Today we're talking about parental alienation, and I believe we might also be chatting a bit about coercive control. Today we have Natalie, my co-host, who everybody knows. We've been seeing her a lot this week. Amanda, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thank you for having me. It's Amanda from the Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo Foundation. I have generational lived experience in parental alienation. So that's pretty much how I came about founding the organisation.
And Not, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm not a man from not a man. And I am currently going through lived experience of parental alienation, battling continually to have contact and relationship with my 3 kids, and facing a number of challenges there. Yep, so that's me.
Thank you. Now, I don't think you've explained how you came to have this name. I think you've told us it offline, but I don't know if you've ever said it online, no, at least in ICMI 21. Would you be happy to briefly explain how you came to have this name?
Certainly. My wife at the time had drunk a little bit too much and said repeatedly, "You're not a man, you're not a man, you're not a man." So I figured that just as many good people do, they will repossess an insult and turn it into a war cry. So that's what I did. I said, okay, then if I'm not a man, then I'm not a man. And here I am publicly as an activist trying to stop this sort of rubbish. So
yeah, you embraced it and owned it.
Yes. Also, it was necessary to have an alias because claiming to be a victim of domestic violence publicly and running for the Australian Senate meant that by claiming to be a DV victim, somehow police considered that meant that I was claiming that somebody else was a perpetrator, which is a breach of a DVO because I'm criticising them using social media. So therefore, I could get criminally charged for saying that I'm a DV victim. So I used an alias.
Yeah. What a world we live in.
Yes.
So we've got a question already from Douglas Wallace. My efforts to have parental alienation recognised internationally and in my country have been countered by the feminists at every time, which I know doesn't surprise you. Part of this is because Marx had his own theories on alienation. Would it help to be more flexible in what we call it, such as calling it child estrangement, domestic coercion, or family severance?
I guess you can call it emotional abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, and rather than using the actual term is paint the picture. You know, the behaviours in the child, that you once had a positive relationship with the children, the alienating tactics that are being used. We have quite an extensive list on the eMMM.org.au website where you can actually look at, it actually comes from the book by my colleague, Dr. Mandy Mathewson and I'm just trying to think of Marcus Turnbull and, hang on, I'm just thinking, Janet Haynes, so I had a bit of a blank there. It's from the book, so it's a little bit more extensive than some of the lists that you'll actually find online. You've got the Amy Baker website, which you can find quite a lot of work on there, but this one just goes a little bit more into, you know, what it actually looks like. And that's often the best way, is to actually, rather than using the term, is actually, yeah, painting the picture and getting the research under their noses.
Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, probably more of a political response to that, which is that if we use a jargon term, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter whether we call it parental alienation or any other term. That term will become the target of attack. So in a way, it's quite arbitrary. If we traded that name for a different name, then it would end up being in exactly the same position, because the name will be attacked, subject to misinformation. So I do certainly think it's useful to avoid using a label and describing the behaviour, as Amanda says. And that successfully sidesteps the accusation that, oh no, this term doesn't exist, it's junk science, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, hang on, this behaviour as described is obviously possible to be done. Of course.
And as you say, oh, sorry, go on, Amanda.
I was just going to say, you know, with our petition, we refer to as parental alienating behaviours. You know, so you can go to the list and it's pretty much like ticking boxes, and parental alienation is the outcome. You know, some people often use the term saying, oh, I'm experiencing parental alienation, and yet they might see their children like, you know, every other weekend, but they're referring to the term, which makes it very difficult for the even though contact denial is a alienating tactic, but it's not parental alienation in its entirety. And that's where it often just gets, it gets quite loosely used, which is unfortunate. And so that's why I started down that pathway to actually educate people publicly about what it is, what the profile of the alienating parent looks like, and what tactics they use, and the outcomes, and the long-term harm it causes children as well as parents. You know,
That's what going on, Amanda.
I was just going to say, we're picking up so many of these dynamics in our studies that we're doing with the University of Tasmania. There's some devastating outcomes for kids and parents.
That's actually a really good point about using the terminology there. And in actual fact, I'm going to go through now and look at our stuff and see if that we're using that appropriately. I think that's a very important point, and I'll look at Wiki for Men and A Voice for Men and so forth, and see if we can make sure that that's properly defined there.
That's good.
Yeah. So there's also the concept of alienation. I can see a comment in the chat from Douglas Wallace talking about alienation linked to Marxist theory. Alienation is also used in contract law type environments as well. So alienation has a whole bunch of different definitions which can be used to distract, and I've had a number of conversations with people about, is it appropriate to use that term in a legal setting, and so on. Again, I don't think it really matters what jargon we use. It's just preferable to not use it.
I guess as long as that term has meaning, and in fact, I would imagine that getting it accepted into the courts and getting the courts to recognise that it has a specific meaning would be. Is that something that, Amanda, that you think that there is that an aim to try to get the courts to not only to recognise it, but to have an understanding of the definition?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much research about it. You know, there's over 1,000 academic articles associated to parental alienation that are peer-reviewed. You know, you're not just going to go, oh, well, let's call it like DV by proxy, you know, let's call it this, you know, because DV by proxy could be using somebody else other than the child, you know, using the child as a weapon, obviously it is. But, you know, you got the people, the likes of Richard Gardner, he calls it divorce poison. You know, it's poisoning the child's mind against the other parent. You know, I mean, everybody knows that a child's mind can be poisoned against the other parent. But the thing is, like, you know, if you use that term, parental alienation, we've heard some parents say that judges have like yelled out and said, do not use that term in my courts ever.
Oh.
You know, and then when they've gone to get transcripts, it's been erased out of the transcripts. So unless you actually go in there and listen to it, unless it's been doctored, but, you know, usually people are going through so much, it takes so much time to go back and, you know, highlight all these things, especially if they've got the misuse of restraining orders as well, in conjunction with the false claims of everything else. I can see Douglas has put up another.
Yes, so Douglas has said there is an inevitable extent of distancing between a child and parent in a family split. I know one of the problems some people have in accepting parental alienation is understanding where usual and common issues that children will suffer are to be recognised as parental alienation. How can this be explained easily?
Wow, I guess, looking at the research, looking at some of the studies that we've done, and looking at we've got a collaboration which is really good in between Dr. Jennifer Harmon, Dr. Amy Baker and Dr. Mandy Mathewson, and these are three researchers that are heavily published in this area of parental alienation, and they've sort of come together now and they're actually starting to publish their work together, which is great. It's good to see that international collaboration and referring to each other's research and things like that. But when you just, I mean, it's just looking at some of these losses. I've actually got it on our website, which let me just quickly bring it up.
Yeah, no worries at all.
It makes it quite clear, like when you actually read. Oops, hang on, that's the wrong page. I'll let you let's quickly go down. I had the page open before, but wasn't refreshing. Here we go, there it is. So, you know, you've got the corruption of their reality, you've got loss of personal identity, loss of childhood and innocence, loss of parental relationship, and then there's a loss of extended family, because usually, you know, the alienator will, you know, cut them off from the rest of the family, the grandparents, and there's often siblings as well that are left behind if one goes and reunifies. Like in my situation, I had one child that reunified, and he was now the traitor. So he ended up being alienated from his own sister. And then you've got the loss of community. So, like, you know, everything that's associated to those parents, and like often the child will be sort of cut off from everything around them. And you can present this in court. You can see, like, you can show, like we've got a really good resource which is by COPME, which is Children of Parents with Mental Illness. They've got like a template that you can use for a child that has a parent that has a mental illness or a mental disorder, and you can actually show like kind of what happens when, say, mum is not well, like who can the child go to, or what happens if this person's working, or you just go through and you actually you can actually paint a picture of the supports in the child's community. And as we know from all the research around the world, connectedness is so important for, you know, raising healthy, well-balanced children. You know, you can't have them growing up in an environment having one worldview of one, like a parent. So there's lots of different ways you can kind of present like what's happening to the child and how it's impacting them. And often you'll see like that black and white thinking. The child will take on that the all good parent and the all bad parent, and you can see that in counselling appointments or in communications and SMSs, and how the child can be used to bully that parent, you know, and you know, you can see that they're worked up, you know, before that contact, and you can't reason with the child. So there's lots of different ways of presenting this, and there's some I don't want to sound like I'm selling my colleague's book, but she has a great book that I'll grab it off the shelf so you can actually see it.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Available in all good bookstores.
You can actually get it on the National Library in Australia now. You can actually view it for free, but that's it there. It might be in a different cover. I got the hard copy in this one, Understanding and Managing Parental Alienation, a Guide to Assessment and Intervention. And there's another really good international book by Demosthenes Larandos and Bill Burnett, and that's Parental Alienation, Science and Law. It's a thick book. It's got so much research in there, and evidence-based practice, and how to like present a case, and also how to question, like, you know, if you've got someone that says that they're a single expert, you know, it's actually got, if they're on the stand, the questions to actually ask them. So there's a lot of information, because it's really hard, like especially if you know, if you've got no money left, which most parents in parental alienation situations that I come across have got no money because it's been in the court for years. At least you could, you know, you spend whatever it is. I think it was $79 US to buy the ebook. It's obviously a lot more expensive. You get it mailed to Australia or wherever you get it mailed, but it's the best way to sort of get it. But there's so much stuff in that book. Yeah.
I noticed Douglas's question was, how can this be explained easily, recognising the difference between the natural distancing that is going to be common and predictable, and what is genuinely parental alienation. I think it's a matter of extremes and consistency. If there is no foundation for the ideas of the child or the views of the child, no recognised foundation in fact, then that would raise suspicions. If there's a polarised view, quite clearly, as Amanda said, this is the good one, this is the bad parent. If we see that sort of polarisation of views where there's a clear alignment, then that is a clear warning signal of parental alienation, rather than just, I haven't seen dad or mum for, you know, for a couple of days, and having to adjust to that, which would be normal.
There's in that parental alienation science and law book, there's what you call the 5-factor model. It used to be the 4-factor model, which was by Dr. Amy Baker, but Lorandos and Burnett have added to it. So the factor 1 is the child manifests contact resistance or refusal, so they avoid a relationship with one of the parents. Factor 2 is the presence of a prior positive relationship between the child and the now rejected parent. And the factor 3 is the absence of abuse, neglect, or seriously deficient parenting on the part of the now rejected parent. And factor 4 is the use of multiple alienating behaviours on the part of the favoured parent, so the alienating parent. And factor 5 is the child exhibits many of the 8 behavioural manifestations of alienation. So that's a great one to go to when you're presenting it, and there's lots of research behind that 5-factor model, and it's in I'm pretty sure it's in Mandy Mathewson's book as well. Yeah, it's a great way to I guess, you know, presenting. It's really difficult because you're quite limited on how many pages you can put in your affidavit, you know, and listing examples, you know.
But saying those criteria would be useful in for assessing it.
Absolutely, yeah. There's another really good book by Amy Baker, and it sort of has, I think I've still got it, I Present Your Case. Yeah, that's it here. This one's really good because it's actually the high conflict custody battle. Protect yourself and your kids from a toxic divorce, false accusations, and parental alienation. That's by Amy Baker, J. Michael Bone, and Brian Ludmer. There's actually a section in there that actually shows you how to actually present your case as a parent, and then there's there was what to ask for in court and things like that. If you go and actually look at the index online, you can actually see, and it's got some really helpful resources. I can actually do a post on our page of some of the links on, you know, helpful resources, or email them to you guys to actually put on your website, because they are the go-to. And as I say, they are backed by research, evidence-based. Yeah.
And yes, please do. As I said, we've got Wiki for Men, and any info you want to send through. In fact, after the conference, I've been, especially the last couple of months, we've flat out with the conference, and things will be sort of waking up a little bit after this, and that's something I'd like to touch base with, and we'll get a lot more information on our sites.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Carl. Thank you both for your powerful, moving presentation. If I've understood correctly, the definition of PA emphasises behaviours. Is this because behaviours can be observed?
Absolutely, they can be observed. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there we go. We've got a couple of other questions.
Some people are, there's also some behaviours in the alienating parent that you might not necessarily see sort of going on because it happens at home. It's like those non-verbal communications, like the child's just come back from the other parent's house and they've had a brilliant time and they're excited to talk about it, and then the alienating parent shows that they're just not interested in it, or they roll their eyes, and, you know, over time the child learns that that's, you know, making that parent unhappy. And then when you've got all that questioning that goes on with the child, you know, like, I'll use the male example, like, where did he take you and what did he do, and like, oh, was he angry with you? And some of these questions will be repeatedly asked, like, you know, they'll be repeatedly asked, and eventually the child will give in and tell that parent what they want to hear, and that will often mean lying, because it's, you know, children want to be helpful and they don't quite understand why they're getting that same question every time, and then when they're giving them answers, they're still getting questioned again. So there's a study that you can look at, that you can refer to in family court, which is the mousetrap study, that actually shows you that sort of process of how children will confess to things that didn't actually happen.
And I think more broadly, that's certainly the case, isn't it? Where children try to, if I understand correctly, children try to please adults, and there have been a lot of studies in relation to how they give evidence, for example, in court, in relation to that, for precisely the same reason, that they would just try to please adults.
Yeah, or there's been suggestive questioning, oh, did Dad hit you? Or did he, forget to feed you or something like that? Or they ask all these different questions, and we find a lot of people in child protection as well very suggestive, because, sometimes you can find there might be a parent that's working in that field that has maybe a history of abuse themselves, or they've had someone really close to them experience it, and instantly they have this perception in their head that they think that parent's abusive because the child's rejecting them, but they don't realise that children who are abused usually have a trauma bond to their abuser, and they don't necessarily reject their abuser. Often it's until later on when they've sort of, but still they still naturally love that parent.
Yes.
It's counterintuitive.
Yes, it is. So James Goat has a question. I think this is an area I haven't heard raised before, actually. You mentioned issues with identity. Is there any documented relationship between PA and gender dysphoria?
That's an interesting question, because we're seeing a lot of problems with like gender identity more and more. We're hearing from all around the world that some parents are changing their children's genders and things like that. So it's a very delicate subject, but it's something that there definitely needs to be more research into it to see what's going on. But there's a lot of reporting of all sorts of things in regard to gender and identity formations and things like that. I can talk from my own experience being an alienated child. As a young girl, I was taken from the age of 11 to 18, and that's a really important period of time in your development. And because my dad used to make comments about my mum, that, oh, that's something that your mum would do, or, oh gosh, you look so much like your mum today, or that's something that your mum would say, and all those sort of things, I started to try and look different. And so I started wearing really big black T-shirts that were, like I'd be wearing like a men's large T-shirt, and I'm only 5'4". I'm not very big. And so I'd be covering myself up, and then I went and dyed my hair like this weird pink, I don't know, it was like a strawberry blonde, but I left it in too long because I didn't have any parental supervision. So they were calling me strawberry and things like that. And so I had a lot of troubles as a child, and not even feeling feminine.
Yeah.
Not even feeling like, and I was developing into a woman, and I didn't feel feminine. Like I'd look at people in dresses and I'd think, oh yeah, that looks nice on them. But if I was to put it on myself, I would just think, oh, it looks just really strange. It felt weird. And I've spoken to other alienated children, male and female, who had the same difficulties with forming their identity, and it hasn't been until I've actually, I started wearing dresses for the first time in 2012. And that was, this is, and I'm 48 now, so it's a long time to have struggled with that side of it. But people look at me and go, oh, but you look feminine. But it was like, what was up in here, and what kind of, what happened in my, those important years in teenage years.
So is there any sort of hard data on that? Because that's actually, I think that is a very interesting area. Maybe that's something that needs to be looked at.
Oh, there is, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff to do with gender identity, and we picked it up in one of our alienated child studies recently. There was one that we did, which was on, it's very difficult to get alienated children to participate in research because they don't realise that they've been alienated. Like myself, I didn't realise I'd been alienated until I was an adult and happened to my kids. So we only had 10 in that study, but in last year's study we had 20, which that data still be. It was a master's student who recently got her marks, but everything's passed, and now we're going to turn all that data into some articles. And there was just so much. Like I was able to, be privy to some of this data, and honestly, it was very validating for myself. But it shook me. Like it was just, because I've seen it happen. Some dynamics in my children as well. That because we're all every case is different. It's not a one size fits all. So you might have one child that's more of an emotional confidant, the other one might be used to emotionally abuse the other parent, or there's, you know, some internalize it and some externalize it. So there's so many different factors with parental alienation.
That's a really, as I said before, a really, I think, important area, and look forward to seeing more data coming out in that area, and that's something we'll look at publicising as well.
Yeah, well, there are some studies that have been done by Amy Baker, but they're from quite long ago, and even like with the targeted parent study that we recently did, they wanted to pick out like the top 10 like key factors of like to contribute to the literature. And they said like targeted parents remain limited. Therefore, there is a need for more worldwide research on the targeted parents' perspective. And that's the same with alienated children as well. There's so many different, dynamics to pick up and outcomes.
And we have a question from Douglas Wallace. When I was split apart from my children, I was always careful to keep my own negative emotions hidden. However, my children, who are now adults, have told me that even saying to them, "Don't forget Mother's Day is coming up," or even "I still love your mother," had the effect on them to alienate them from their mother, who cheated on me and wasn't being nice about me. Sally touched on this right at the end. My comments for parents on how to avoid this, any comments for parents on how to avoid this kind of issue?
Absolutely. It's a difficult thing. I remember when I first got my children back, like my son was the first one that came back after 4.5 years, and my daughter was 7.5, just almost 8 years. And when I got them back, like I was always saying like positive things, but then you could see how they're just so hyper protective and they can't talk about the other parent or share anything because of all this manipulation going on. And yeah, it's a real struggle for the kids because they feel guilty. They've participated in the alienation and they've rejected you. And it's like when their world has been full of like emotional input, they lose that ability to use critical thinking. And so like they might think that because one parent's saying, oh, I'll use for Douglas' example, Dad always talks bad about me and he's emotionally abusive, or he's this, they can say multiple things. And yet when they're with their dad, they might not necessarily see it, but because they've been programmed, they believe that. And then when that parent, says anything about the other parent, it's like all of a sudden the anxiety goes up, the critical thinking shut down. They don't think about, that's what's so disturbing about this form of abuse. It really messes with their thinking, so that they don't see if there could be more evidence. Is there another side to this? What happens if I take on a different view to this comment that's been made? Or, it's just, they're just shut down. And it's like that they take on that parent's thinking and feeling as if it's their own thoughts and feelings. It's
So is it better for one parent to not mention the other then, at least in that regard?
Yeah, well, it's sort of avoiding that, especially in like that first 2 years of a reunification, is focusing on like your own environment, but also encouraging critical thinking in other areas. Like you'll see these sort of dynamics will play out in their own relationships. They'll often compromise themselves, or they might become a bully to other. You get a child that might become an alienator. One might become the pleaser. Where both of mine come out as being pleasers. They compromise themselves and things like that. So you could sort of say, you could teach them like healthy boundaries and things like that instead, or have. There's a couple of games that you can actually use which encourages critical thinking. I always recommend it's a good idea to have an independent sort of therapist who can actually work with the kids on these specific things, because it's hard when it's a parent, because you've got one parent saying one thing, one saying the other. But if you've got a therapist independently, teaching some helpful tools how to deal with their situation, then that works better. Some of the books actually refer to the types of therapies that are required. Like normal traditional therapy just does not work while you've got the child still in the care of the alienating parent. If anything, it actually makes it worse. We actually shared an article a couple of days ago about that it just does not work.
So you mentioned a couple of, sorry, go on.
So I'm just reading Douglas's question, saying something like, "Don't forget about Mother's Day is coming up," or "I still love your mother." It sounds like Douglas is the targeted parent and trying to, trying to be reasonable. It just seems to be a lose-lose situation for the targeted parent.
Damned if you don't.
Yeah, that any mention of the other parent will raise anxiety, particularly if the other parent is the alienating parent. So we'll just remind the child that they're actually in a battle zone, and even bringing up the thought of the other parent will re-trigger a whole bunch of trauma and what internal obligations they feel to either spy or perceive the world through the lens that the alienating parent wants them to see the world through. So I really empathise with Douglas saying, well, what are you going to say? You can try not to deliberately bring up unnecessarily issues about the other parent and focus on the here and now. But I know, having tried to walk that line myself, that it's just impossible. You can't have every topic pretending that there's only one parent.
Yeah,
that's abuse in a different direction. So
absolutely, it depends on the scale of the alienation as well. Like it depends on and whether you've had like no contact at all, kind of thing. Like if you've had no contact at all, it's always sort of like focusing forward and learning to communicate with your child. Like often people miss out on many years of contact with their kids and they lose touch of where the child's at on a kind of a conversational level. So it's good to get online, and actually I've put a couple of them on my website of different articles which are helpful to engage with the children. There's one in particular that I found very helpful. It's got quite a funny name to the book. I'll just quickly grab it up because it's not coming to the top of my head. It's something like, "Can you take me to the..." Here it is. Adolescence. Yeah, it says, "Get out of my life, but first could you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? A Parent's Guide to the New Teenager." That's a very helpful book because, when you're dealing with adolescence, that's like a whole nother thing in itself. But then when you add the mix of parental alienation as well, it's good to have these resources to sort of go to and sort of know what's a teenage kind of behaviour and what's parental alienation behaviour. But, I found that I had to avoid saying anything about, the other parent at all in my first couple of months with the kids, because I could just see straight away they get anxious and not want to talk about it. But then now, like we're, I'm years out of it with my son, and I'm sort of 2 years out of it with my daughter, and almost, no, actually this is this is the second Christmas now. There's still some things that she's still protected, but I can still mention things now, like, about the dad, because they're moving into state and things like that. So I'm just sort of trying to encourage, well, make sure you spend more time with them before they leave, and, try not to plan too much with all your friends, through this Christmas break if they're leaving in a couple of weeks and stuff like that. And, she can actually, because her anxiety is being dealt with as well, it's sort of, it has helped with having these sort of conversations. But as I say, it's not a one size fits all. You've kind of got to monitor, like, if you did bring up a subject that was touchy, to see how they respond. And to say, damned if you do, damned if you don't in parental alienation. It's so hard.
I've in the last week, I've actually had a discussion with a psychologist about this particular topic, which is how do you walk the line as an alienated parent to not engage in the same destructive behaviour, but also try to maintain a relationship when there's very little to hang a relationship on. So things like, so what have you been doing at school, can easily, on one hand, you can say, you're probing into their life. On the other hand, well, what else are you going to talk about?
And that specifically is an alienating tactic, is to withhold information about their schooling from you. And exactly. They usually know that they're not allowed to share anything with you.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so in the past couple of weeks, I said, oh, okay, so you've moved house. Oh, right. Okay. Are you still in the same suburb? No, not allowed to say that. So that's a big secret, because somehow my son is now not allowed to tell me where he lives, presumably because I'm a horrible, violent person.
Stalker,
and,
you know.
But yeah, stalker, and completely without any court requirement for that. It's just, no, we've moved and don't want to tell you, and it's a secret, don't tell your dad. So walking that line of asking questions to know about their life, to find information, to actually be able to engage and have a discussion. That's on one side. On the other side, yeah, there is probing and trying to get information and shifting the topic onto, these are all the ways that your other parent is terrible. Obviously, that's engaging in alienating behaviour, which isn't justified by anybody. But walking that line is tricky.
Yeah, well, that's what's good to be familiar with the alienating tactics and behaviours and things like that, is sort of trying to avoid those topics where they're going to disconnect completely, because that's why children cut off, is because it just gets too difficult and they've got their emotional bar of one parent up here and they're always trying to please them, and cutting off that parent completely reduces that pressure on them. And a lot of people just don't understand that, unfortunately, and that's why some of the therapists that get involved don't know how to coach parents or to provide the right therapies for children. So I would sort of suggest sort of things like trying to find, like, what are their interests and things like that, or what do they like doing, or what have they got, if they've got something planned for the upcoming break, or give them little updates about what you've been up to and things like that, or bring up something, oh yeah, I was thinking the other day about, like, talk about a memory, or, oh, do you want me to send through that photo? I still have that photo, or just little ththings like that, but sometimes you might get accused then of living in the past. So that's why I say it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's hard. It's really hard. And until we get interventions from, like, child protection or the police or the courts, we have to kind of almost muddle our way through these sort of situations, and sort of like reading books like Divorce Poison by Dr. Warshak. That's got some tips in there. We've got some tips on our website on the Parental Alienation page. There's one download actually on there, which is really helpful. I'm going to grab the name of it really fast. It's got some great tips. Actually, what I'll do is I'll copy a document of everything that I think that are helpful in regard to alienation situations. This one's called Beyond the High Road, Responding to 17 Parental Alienation Strategies Without Compromising Your Morals or Harming Your Child. And they're actually really...
I want that. I need that.
Yeah, and it is available. Like, it didn't used to have to pay. It used to be a paywall for it, but we've actually got permission. We've actually got it on our website now on the parents page. It's halfway down the page under communicating with the other parent, but it's sort of it sort of lists a few things under there. It's hard because, like, sometimes you might list like a whole bunch of things, and what we've learned through our through our social media is that you'll get a lot of people commenting, but you won't get a lot of click-throughs because people are in crisis. And so you kind of have to provide, instead of articles, it's providing listicles. So you've got like little lists, like little bite-sized chunks for people to be able to just go, oh yeah, I got that. But if you have a certain subject line, next thing you know, it triggers them, and you get people typing about their experiences, and you'll get so much information on a comment that will be as much as what you'll find probably in an affidavit. And that's a good sign that not a good sign, it's a sign that someone is experiencing trauma, and it can look unbalanced. It can look like someone's unhinged online. And that's what the big thing that I found was when I stepped into this space and started working with parents. At first, I could have easily gone and just go, oh God, there's something wrong with him, or her, or whatever, and just think, oh, he's probably got like a mental disorder or something, thinking the way they were behaving was just so, odd and aggressive like. But now that I understand what trauma does to people, and that can drive you into some deep dark places. And then when you've got the misuse of restraining orders, you've got all these allegations that get made. You've got so many parents out there, they're in absolute crisis, yet there is no support from the courts or child protection at the moment. And they can see why I'm so passionate about getting this recognised, because it's just, yeah, as I said, like I think I mentioned, our suicide rate was 23% of the targeted parents had attempted suicide at least once in one of our later studies, and that's huge. That's a big amount.
It's amazing, despite the what I would consider to be overwhelming evidence, we actually have, in our case in Australia, representatives in the government, as you've pointed out, denying it happens. You've got courts denying it. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, so it's not just the denial of it, it's the misrepresentation on social media. Yep. You've got these extreme feminists that are saying that parental alienation is what abusive fathers claim to take children away from protective mothers. And
well, the judge in my case actually said, before looking at the evidence, before hearing the testimony of experts, one of whom was Amanda, said, this is not a parental alienation case. Well, the judge couldn't know that.
Yes, before the evidence was offered, how would the judge possibly know such a thing?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And if you ask them to define what parental alienation is and what all the alienating tactics and all that kind of stuff, yeah, they'll probably.
Well, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's not that.
Yeah.
So we're starting to come up on our hard deadline. We have a hard deadline of 48 minutes, and I usually aim to wrap up around 45. But we do have a couple of questions that have come in. Carl asks, are there any resources for therapists working either with the parents or children in relation to PA?
Absolutely. Those are two books that I mentioned, which was the Understanding and Managing Parental Alienation. And there's actually another one. There's actually a new one by Amy Baker. Let me grab that. It's when you actually look at it, sort of, what is it? Parental alienation books. I think this redirects to Amazon. Actually, I do have it. Yes, I do have it. Oh, God, I've got so many books here. I wouldn't actually pull it from that bookshelf. I've got a little bookshelf. But this one's called Restoring Family Connections. Oops.
Just be there for a moment. Yep.
Yeah, and that one's by Amy Baker and Paul Fine, Fine, and Aliana Baker, Lachine Baker. Yeah, so that's another really good resource for therapists. But in the two books that I've mentioned in the beginning, which was that Parental Alienation, Science and Law, that talks about therapy, and so does Understanding and Managing Parental Alienation, A Guide to Assessment and Intervention. They both,
I can post some information on the Hoover website too. If you want to send some stuff through to me, Amanda, I'll post it on the Hoover website. We've got one last question. Alienating children don't know how to respond when a parent makes contact, said during open discussion. It's true. That is true the other way around too. I've talked to parents who are feeling so hurt at years of distance that the emotional risk when a child makes contact seems massive. Not spoke of this. The need to pull back to some extent just to protect oneself. How to avoid this echoing alienation?
I've often said your pain can become their pain. And so it's really important that parents do educate about the child's actual experience, that it's not their fault, that they do have high anxiety, that their thinking can be, distorted. And, it's important not to be like reactive, not to push your side of the story, focus on the child, even though like you've got your own feelings and in some situations the child's been worked up to be like abusive towards you. There's a really good term that Dr. Walshak mentions in his book, and it said strike when the iron is cold. And often with metal it's more pliable and you can work with it, but with alienation situations you don't want the child to be heated. So if you've got a child that's contacting you and they're worked up and they're it's best not to actually speak at that time. Try and find another time to communicate. And you can say things like, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, or I don't remember that being that way. And so try to avoid those sort of subjects. But if they're heated, you're just not going to raise them with them, especially if they've got an alienating parent standing over them or someone who's actually doing that SMSing, contacting, because I found that that's what was actually happening in my situation, because I happened to keep all the SMS records, and one of my kids decided that they wanted to see it. And I was like, oh, I didn't want them to go through all that, but they wanted to see, they wanted validation of what the other parent was actually doing in the situation, because I've never pushed all this court stuff under the kids' noses. I've always tried to move them into self-care to get them back on track in their lives. But yeah, eventually some of these kids do get that curiosity, but you don't want to open up those floodgates, you know, and overwhelm the child, because that's going to have that your pain becomes their pain, you know. So some of the things you have to sort of, I don't know if I answered that appropriately, but you've just got to, yeah, there's ways of managing contact with the kids.
Yeah, I was responding to Douglas. It's I've found this particularly challenging myself, that my emotional pain of making contact with the children is so great that I tend to avoid making contact, which then results in them feeling abandoned and unloved, which then feeds back into me feeling abandoned and unloved, which so it's really, really difficult for me to know how to do that. It's a two-way feedback loop.
Absolutely.
I'm looking for, I guess I could ask exactly the same question Douglas asked, which is, how do we fix this?
Yeah,
I don't know.
There's I'm just going to find that quick metaphor that I created out of the textbook by Amy Baker, and it was Messages of Love. Because from what we know from the research, when parents just completely withdraw and don't make any more contact because they think, oh, well, my children don't love me, or they're angry at me, or whatever it is, the children that have been able to come through and actually participate in the study wish that their alienated or the targeted parent did not give up, did not walk away, that still tried. And so what we're teaching is, this is it's probably a good one to end this one on. Is this?
I'm actually going to have to jump in. We're running out of time. So you got a really quick comment?
It's just a little paragraph. It's just a little paragraph.
Go on.
Think of your messages like watering a plant. When we plant a seed in the ground, we cannot see what is happening beneath the earth, but we water the soil anyway. The watering is an act of hope and faith that one day a flower will bloom. Your relationship with your child is like that flower. It needs attention and care every day, so that one day, perhaps when you least expect it, the flower will bloom and your child will respond to you with the openness of love.
I think that is a fantastic place to finish. Thank you very much, everybody.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.